To the early native people, education was part of their everyday life. Their books were the rocks, the rivers and lakes, the trees and roots, the sun, the moon and the stars. It was from these elements that the socio-economic activities developed. Creative life was in everything and life was affordable. For our education system to improve our society, it is important to go back to the basics and reassign our education system new terms of reference.
Let's reassign our universities new terms of reference, which we now call Education 5.0, from idea to product. But this is good. People can have this design, but there are certain things that any Zimbabwean should know before we can move this country forward. And I believe that this is a belief that we can always use when we are reforming our education. One, we must know that the most important thing in this country and in the world and in life is food. So all our technologies, all our energies, all our science is to look at food. What a country eats determines its prosperity or poverty levels. What is our main principle? Our cardinal principle. The principle should be always, never eat what you don't grow. Never have a staple food that you have to import. Number one, is Zimbabwe. That's what we have to know. A country will never prosper based on buying things. A country will prosper based on doing things and producing things. And the first thing that we must produce is food. Our technologies have to be around our food first. Why do I say that? If you look, for example, at our consumption of, I'll just give an example, just to illustrate my point. Apples. Apples grow wild in Europe. They grow in that climate. If you try to grow an apple in Zimbabwe, you have to give it special climatic conditions for it to grow. That's why you will never compete on apple growing with a European country. Because an apple, matamba Europe. Just imagine you have made apples your staple food. You always have perpetual shortages. So what that basically means is that Zimbabwe has to learn the most basic important things for itself. Our education has to be oriented towards food technologies. So food is very important. Why are people not making juice from matamba, for example? We have marula juice, for example, which was made well afterwards. Mukumbi. Mukumbi. Marula juice. Mukumbi. But because sometimes what your colonial education does, do you know the name of damba in English? It's a mangi apple. So they call it mangi apple. If you tell your child, please come and go and take a mangi apple, will they ever take it? By name, it's already condemned. It's a condemned fruit. But yet we know kuna majumui, we know kuna mangono, and all these fruits, you don't need irrigation from Tambo. You don't even need pesticides for it. Because it is already acclimatized to this environment. Just imagine with a matamba plantation. Would you need a boom spray? Would you need fertilizer? Would you need to water it with irrigation? Our production systems are so expensive because we're simply growing things that are not supposed to be grown this well. It's good on a small scale, but if you try to do it on a large scale, you will always be asking for food. These are the principles that we are using to design our higher and tertiary education system. So that Zimbabwe says, never again you grow based on the resources that you have. You don't grow on the resources that you don't have. In other words, you can't buy things from country X in order to sell to country X. It's not possible. Trade must be based on your comparative advantage. So Zimbabwe has to start growing its own food. The food like rapoko, like millet. Who says you can't have, everybody's talking about soybeans, soybean oil. What's wrong with groundnut oil? Because that's what grows here. What's wrong with Nyimo oil? Because that's what grows here. But because we are using a design of agriculture that was meant to be a maize economy, that was meant to remove the people from their own food so that you begin to be dependent on another food. And what did they do on the maize economy? There has been a lot of investment on the technology on maize so that it's easy to harvest, so that it's easy to mill, so that it's easy to eat. But it doesn't grow. Every year, it's very little maize. So perpetual hunger. We want to design our education system so that it gets out of this cage. We are in a cage. So that's number one principle that any Zimbabwean needs to know. Technology around food. And we are saying to ourselves, our education has to have its technologies around food. The next issue that is very important to me is loyalty. Loyalty is extremely important. I'm saying loyalty to Zimbabwe because we are a product of Zimbabwe. When I'm doing my talk, for example, with my students, I normally say, do you know that when you were conceived, you were just conceived using 2 cells? And the rest of the biomass, like me, you can see I'm over 80 kg, is the soil of Zimbabwe that is building me. So basically that soil is the source of my loyalty because Zimbabwe is me. Because when you look at this is Zimbabwe soil. This is what we call deep consciousness about who are you? Who are you? I am Zimbabwe. What do you mean? I'm not a visitor. I am Zimbabwe. You are Zimbabwe. Everybody is Zimbabwe in Zimbabwe because they are a product of Zimbabwean soil. As long as people know this, it becomes very easy to belong to this nation. It becomes very easy to defend it. It becomes very easy that you are not a coward when it comes to defense of Zimbabwe's interests. Because we are Zimbabwe. And you defend it with Zimbabwe. Because we are Zimbabwe. So it's very important. Loyalty to us is very important. Loyalty, normally people think that loyalty is loyal to a person. Yes, you can be loyal to a person in a system, but that person has to be loyal to Zimbabwe first. So being loyal to Zimbabwe will make sure that you will always be nourished because Zimbabwe is what is you. I always take a difference between educated and schooled people. Schooled people might be drilled people. Drilled means parrot work, whereby a parrot, when you tell it good morning, it says good morning, good evening, good evening. It doesn't have to understand. Education means you can define it, you can explain it, you know it. You are using much more than 5 senses. Because 5 senses, which means sight, smell, taste, hearing, touch. These are basically senses for survival. They are not senses for progress. Senses for progress are deep consciousness that tells you that there is moonrise, there is also moonset. That tells you that when the moon is up, the tide in the sea is like this. These are things that you don't see, but they are things that make sense. That's consciousness. Consciousness is that you know that you are the soil of Zimbabwe. When we are talking about Zimbabwe, we're not talking about an alien concept. We're talking about us. So that is very important to me. And to this nation when we are reforming our higher and tertiary education system, what do I want really then to say? It is to say, if you and me, if today there is a big earthquake and it crushes every Zimbabwean that is within this soil, every Zimbabwean, and if another person comes, let's say we are all gone, dead, I don't know whether that person will call this country Zimbabwe. Because Zimbabwe is you and me, and we will be dead by then. We are dead. So when you are dead, Zimbabwe is dead. So what basically that means is that consciousness brings loyalty to your country. That the country is you. So there's nothing like, Zimbabwe is a problem. If you say Zimbabwe is a problem, it means you're a problem. Basically, that consciousness is what we think is very important. Then the third part that every Zimbabwean should know when we are reforming our education is that every individual should know that what you wish for yourself is what you should wish for others. And the president has always been saying love. That's what it means. Love. That's what it means.
Be good to your fellow citizens, defend them, rescue them, give them confidence. Don't tell them you are useless, because that's what the colonial system has always been telling us. Useless. Every day you end up actually believing it. So these are the three things that I think to me are very important to Zimbabwe and how we have to actually model our high-end tertiary education system. Remember, I'm still talking about the background. I'm not talking about then what did we do in order to address all these issues in our education system.
So, thus we need an education system that is based on our heritage. The heritage that I'm talking about here is not like before you go to a lecture, you must dance mchongoyo, or mbube, or sangoma, or whatever. What we are talking about, when we are talking about heritage, is much deeper than that. A nation relies upon its heritage, which means its fauna, its animals, its flora, its plants, its minerals, its water, and its human resources for it to develop. A country needs its people. A country needs its resources and everything. That's the heritage. The heritage that we have at this moment as Zimbabweans is that we have a resilient people, we have an intelligent people. If we basically design the system for them to produce, they will. And they will produce based on the heritage of this country. You cannot trade goods from country X that you buy from country X. It's not possible. I've always said, countries have all these resources. They have soil, they have water, they have minerals, they have animals, they have people. But why are they different in terms of development? Countries are different in terms of development because of this simple statement that I'm going to say. Resources are not, they become. Resources become resources because of brain. Remember, you can take a diamond, put it in your catapult, shoot a dove, take the dove, eat the dove, leave the diamond in the forest because you might not know that it's a diamond. So resources become resources because we have knowledge. Knowledge is very important to us. That's why our education is to be transformed to understand Zimbabwe's environment. I will give you an example of a simple heritage philosophy which was being followed by our forefathers. Great Zimbabwe was built of stone because it was the strongest rock around. They looked at their environment. They looked at the several rocks. They discovered that the granite rock was the strongest. They chiseled it. They built Great Zimbabwe. They built the Dlodlo ruins. They built Kami ruins, Tsindi ruins. They built all sorts of structures. Great Zimbabwe, 10 centuries later, it still stands up strong and going. What that means is that they used heritage. They used the resources that were around. There is no imported stone that you see at Great Zimbabwe. They used the stones that were around. Zimbabwe will develop based on its resources, with well-applied minds on the resources. Resources are not, they become. They become resources because of mental power, because of brain power. It is the brain power that we need to model within a very good system, such that it then produces those goods and services. If you have an engineer who says, oh, I've designed a new material for building a road, then you say, very good, nice, come, now let's start building this road. And then that engineer tells you, oh, by the way, the material is to be imported from country Z. Then you know you're in trouble. Because this person is not using heritage. They are making you import things. I have said, and I can say it again, the level of your import bill, the amount, the size of the import bill is merely a reflection of the level of the utilization of the brain power and the heritage of that country. What do I mean? If your import bill is 90% of your budget, it means you are using 10% of your brain power as a country. Simple. Simple. But if your import bill is 2%, then it means that country is using 98% of its heritage. It's using 98% of its brain power. So what we are trying to turn around in our higher and tertiary education system is to make education result in industries based on the heritage that we have. We normally say, somebody was, my professor at some point was telling me, Mapenzi, they look far for solutions when the solution is just right here. I was reading a book of a Soviet strategy, and it was saying, in this world, there are only 2 places that you need to control in this world. The first one, it was 1952, remember? The first one was the Middle East because of its oil. The second was Central and Southern Africa, Zimbabwe included, because of its rich mineral resources. So my question is, why are we poor? Why do we have to be poor? Resources are not, they become. We don't have to work on the land, we have to work on the brains of our people. That's why education is very important. So in order to industrialize, we have to turn the tables and make sure that our education system is abandoning the colonial model. It is moving into the modern model. It has to get out of the cage. So, what are we saying when we say resources are not, they become? You cannot trade with other nations based on the resources that you buy from those countries, but your own resources. It's simple logic, isn't it? It's no-brainer. It's a no-brainer. Matambana gudo. Chindroenda, chindrodzoka. What basically that means? You cannot buy goods from country X to sell back to country X. That logic doesn't work. Nations prosper based on their comparative advantage. We are always saying, this country, for example, has the richest diversity in mineral resources. This country, for example, has 26 billion tons of coal. This country, for example, has got more than 30 billion tons of iron ore. That should be the basis of this country's development. Its resources, its people, resilient, very intelligent, should be the basis of the development of this country. In other words, what we are basically saying is a no-brainer. If you have cows, I will give you 2 goats. It means I have to have the goats first for you to give me a cow. I cannot buy a cow from you in order to sell a cow to you. No-brainer. So what we are saying is, our education system is to realize that it has to transform this environment, this Zimbabwean environment, so that we move out of the cage. So the basis of international trade is that we will trade using our competitive advantage. We will trade using goods that other countries don't have. Our nation, therefore, is to rely on its heritage first and foremost as the basis of its international competitiveness. So, but this can only happen when we transform our higher and tertiary education system. When we make sure that the product of our higher and tertiary education system is not the one of saying, ndinafuna msebenzi opasa. But we are not saying that every one of us should be intelligent. We are not saying every one of us can be industrialist. But if an education system is not designed very well, then it means you will produce zero. But we cannot have zero. If it's zero, it's not the problem of the people. It's the problem of the design of the system. So this is exactly what we are looking at. Thus, I just have to say, you cannot buy development. And you cannot import yourself to prosperity. It's not possible. Once your import bill is very large, it means the Jews run. So what we want is to add value to this country. But we are doing something. Because just wait. Because sometimes people are saying, you're talking a lot. But what should we do? We have a solution to it. And we have said ED's government has a solution to it. ED has a solution to it. And this is what I'm going to talk about. Everything you buy or import is the last principle, second last principle that I want to talk about. Everything you buy or import, uri kutenga njere dzavamwe. Because hapana vasina matombo. Nobody. Hakuna kusina dombo. Dombo has to be value added and then you can buy it. So, importing basically means kutenga njere. That's why I was saying, if you have got 90% of import, it means you are utilizing 10% of your brains, 90% you are basically buying njere dzavamwe. And one thing that I want to talk about, which is very important, which makes things very simple, which we have always been saying is a reform agenda of our higher and tertiary education system. We said the university today, the polytechnic today, the college today, Ndiro Dare Ramazwan, is the Indaba of today. This is the Indaba of today. Traditionally, we used to be called to Edare to go and learn how to make a spear. And when you come out of that Dare or Indaba, you will be an expert or a Mija Nichi to make a spear. But the question is, why is it that we have got a Dare which is supposed to modernize and industrialize this country, but it doesn't do so? Then you say, is it the people? No, it's not the people. And when you get out of the cage, that day that you get out of the cage, that day that you know that it's rapopo that I must eat, that day that you know it's millet that I must eat, that day that you know it's groundnut that I must eat, that day that you know it's roundnut that I must eat, is the day that Zimbabwe will start developing. As long as you say, I want to grow this crop, but then it needs this irrigation equipment, then it needs that, then it needs that, agriculture becomes such an expensive venture. So, I hope you understand that I'm talking about the design of the system. And as I said before, heritage refers to the natural endowments of Zimbabwe: flora, fauna, water, minerals, and human resources.